Hey everybody, this is Eric Enge, and this is the Digital Marketing Answers Show. And believe it or not, this is our first Tuesday show with David Amerland on the line. Say hi, David.
Hi guys, it's been a pleasure to be here, and I've actually been looking forward to it because I've been doing a lot of writing, and this is kind of it feels really refreshing.
To do some talking. So before I go on to my co-host, tell us why you're wonderful, David.
What am I writing, did you say?
No, why you are wonderful.
Well, I don't really. This is one of those questions I don't really know how to answer. I'll have to Google it. Well, guys, I've been traveling a lot, I suppose. I don't know if I'm wonderful, but I bring in an informed perspective in terms of search, primarily because of the contact I've had very recently across quite a lot of different industries and a lot of different initiatives happening across Europe, and some of them are even in the non-profit governmental sector, which has been really interesting. So I think the things I experienced and saw firsthand there have a direct impact and are also caused by many of the things we've been talking about over the last 18 months. So I'm hoping we can discuss all that.
That sounds good. And I'm going to ask Mark a much simpler question. First of all, my co-host, Mark Traphagen, we do this show every Tuesday together. So, Mark, tell us why you are awesome.
I have an answer for that, because I'm wearing today my matching David Amerland t-shirt.
Yay! That's really cool.
That's it.
That's the only reason you're awesome?
Pretty much.
Okay. Okay, so today, folks, we are going to talk about semantic search. We've had this discussion in various guises many times on the show, since David does join us once a month. And it's a show that I know Mark and I always look forward to, because we get to the end of it and it's like, damn, it's over. And drives us a little bit nuts that we can't keep going. But that's the way it goes. And what we're going to do today is kind of like a gut check, kind of a go back to the start of it all and reassess what's progressed since we first started these shows, and talk about the new things that are happening and the like. And this is the Digital Marketing Answers Show, so we do lots of Q&A here. And David and Mark, I just shared the stream with you. Sorry for not doing that earlier. So please do shoot questions at us. Probably the first 20 minutes or so, David, Mark, and I will probably chatter a bit, but then we'll start pulling in the questions and addressing them after that. So please queue them up, and we look forward to dealing with those. So, all right. What's up? What's going on, David? I mean...
Okay, I mean, here we are, and we've been talking about semantic search for some time now. And let's actually establish a baseline, exactly where we are and where it's heading in all this. We started off the conversation saying that a lot of the old SEO tricks and techniques didn't matter. We were hoping that a lot of the new ones would actually come in. We're talking about social signal. We're talking about the authority of the individual profile under the guise of the highly contested term author rank. And we've also been talking about trust rank in terms of how we connect across the web. And we're talking about entities in the many various forms. And it's been 18 months since the whole thing sort of really took off. And now we can sort of look back and see exactly what's happening and what the results are. Increasingly, and we must say that, in order for semantic search to kick in, what we need essentially is a semantic index. And semantic index is always language specific because it is contextually aware, which means it needs to take cultural signifiers into account. And to highlight the importance of this, consider that the US semantic search index is different to the UK semantic search index, and it's the same language, but the culture is different. And, well, arguably the same language, perhaps. And the same can be said for Australia, where they'll have their own. Now, all this takes time. Essentially, Google has to build those semantic search indexes or indices individually for each language, and in the process it also has to enrich its understanding of entities, which are people, things, and places, and begin to connect the dots in between. In all this time now, we've actually seen some progress. We are increasingly seeing in search answers come up as a result of a question, and sometimes the answers are just one sort of quick sentence. Now we increasingly are getting lists of steps which come up in terms of a search query, and the way this is progressing signifies two things. First of all, Google is getting better at understanding the context of questions and providing really quick answers when they are the right thing to do. And the second thing, of course, is that Google is beginning to expand its number of websites and sources to which it has high confidence. We're beginning to see in the search results coming in places other than Wikipedia, which was a standard one. All this is good news because essentially it means that the entity index is getting bigger and bigger. And with semantic search, once you have an entity, essentially there's a high trust factor in that in terms of what it is and what it does, which means that the interaction, the connections it has with other things begin to become a lot easier to understand, and everything accelerates. So essentially with semantic search, things happen faster and faster as we move forward, rather than staying at the same pace or even perhaps slowing down because the complexity increases. Where does that leave us as marketers, as website owners, as perhaps individuals? Well, again, we've learned a few things. We've learned, first of all, that the basics in terms of SEO have always been valid, and they always have been, but they are being superseded by context and quality and the sort of value which we create in the content which we build, and value and quality are not always synonymous. We've learned also that the activities we have across G+ and across the web also have an impact on us as individuals, but they're not a ranking factor. And this is something which needs to be stressed, because we talked about social signal on a number of occasions. We have discussed social signals in terms of semantic search, and there's always a miscomprehension that it actually is a strong ranking factor, meaning that if you have a strong presence on G+ or Twitter or even perhaps Facebook, I've heard a number of times, then you can do things which will impact on search. And this has never been the case, and I must stress this, and now we also begin to have evidence of that, although there are other things which you can do which do impact on search. Overall, it's leading to a web which is clearer, more transparent, higher in trust, a web where you need to have authority in order to be able to gain trust and do anything. And the world is becoming a lot more transparent by degrees. We actually begin to see a lot more verticals right across the world, including government and organizations, trying to bring up their data and connect it in a more transparent way, because that's the only way they can actually win in a search driven by entities now.
Yes, and sorry, I have to interrupt the stream for just a moment. So there's a lot of video problems going on. To audience, we're very sorry for that. The blue boxing seems messed up. First of all, I'm not blue boxing anything. I haven't since the show beginning, and it seems to be stuck on my face right now. I'm sure that's a lovely face. Thank you thank you all for saying so. Mark and David, one thing we could try is I could leave momentarily and come back.
Okay.
Without killing the thing out.
Well, that's the thing. I think I have to.
I guess as long as you come right back in, it should be okay.
Well, the thing is, sorry everybody for talking about this, just trying to...
it doesn't get any more authentic than this, right?
Yeah, I mean, do I just close the window and reopen the window? I mean, I can try to do that. I know what to do when the internet connection goes down. That's easy. But I guess I'm going to try it to see if that improves things.
Okay.
Sorry for those of you there in the live audience. I think this will work.
If we never see you again, Eric, it's been nice to know you. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to disappear into the internet ether. I'll be back in 1 minute.
All right, this is Adventures in Live Internet.
It's actually live, so it hasn't gone off yet.
Yeah, so we're still on the air, and we're still on YouTube. So David, while we're waiting for Eric to come back in, let me ask you, you gave us a good broad overview there of where semantic search is going and the importance of it in Google. What are the specific?
Okay, how's that, everybody? That better?
Okay, you're back. Let's see if people can tell us if it changes faces. Now we'll have to wait to get some feedback in the comments.
Well, actually, just David. Why don't you say something, David?
Okay. Hi there, guys.
There you go.
There you go. Original.
That does look like it's better because it's at least switching for me now. I don't know what was going on before. It was awful. But
well, I was while you were gone, I was just starting to ask a question to David. If you want me to finish that.
No, I don't want. Yeah, no, sure. Go ahead.
Okay. And I see Mick Sharp saying that we're all good. So apparently that was the fix, Eric. Thanks for doing that.
Thank you, everybody, for your patience. Really.
Mick Sharp is Sky King for the day. So please show some reverence.
Absolutely.
There you go.
Yeah. We all bow.
So David, I was about to ask you what the great general overview. What specific changes or indications, improvements have we seen recently that are in the semantic search realm? The things that we can actually see in Google that have changed recently. Can you give us some specifics?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we can see a number of things. First of all, let's start with Google search. We begin to see actual websites which do not belong to Wikipedia come up in search, and we have also been able to see that two things from that. First of all, semantic markup in their data hasn't played a role in that, but the quality of the content they have created and the structural approach to that content actually has. So specifically, we're talking about when there's an answer in search which says, step 1, step 2, step 3, and here it is in terms of a search query. And this is new. This is very new, and we've only seen it relatively recently. And we've seen also the disappearance of author-ranked pictures, which happened very recently. It's arguable whether this is an improvement or not, but certainly in terms of how author-rank is used, it hasn't changed in any way in terms of the importance of it, but the visual aspect actually has, and this is a very practical example of the ever-evolving route that semantic search takes. I must stress something here, that essentially semantic search is a big data issue, or the big data aspect of the web, and Google is constantly monitoring everything that happens across the web, and the moment that there's a trend in something which impacts on search and skews it, Google almost on the fly will change this. So we should be expecting to see constant change and refinements within inverted commas as we go forward into the future. So this is a constant. The second thing we have seen is Google Now, which has grown in prominence in terms of what it actually gives us. The ability of Google Now to become a lot more predictive, a lot more accurate, has increased. This is directly linked to the semantic index. And I must say, when I was actually looking at this in preparation for today's interview, I went back to my original research. And in 2004, Sergey Brin and Larry Page gave an interview to the former Newsweek journalist Stephen Levi. And at the time, they said that essentially search has to be part of your brain. It has to augment your brain's ability to do things. And if we think back in 2004, search didn't do anything like that. It was basically sort of like a signpost pointing to where information lay, which then we had to go and retrieve. And even back as far back as 2004, which is 10 years ago, they articulated a vision which we're only now experiencing, which we're experiencing today.
Yeah, it's to me, I think it's been a very interesting time. You mentioned the how-tos, just to give people an example, and I love this example that they did it for this search query. I've been talking about the example of the search phrase "how to make French toast" for the longest time, and for years I've been talking about how odd that query is, because as I always explain it, I haven't eaten French toast in over 25 years. I can still tell you how to make it. It's just not very hard. And you can do a relatively sophisticated query, in title : how to make French toast, which requires that phrase to be in the title tags. You still get tens of thousands of pages. And I've always maintained that Google needs 4. for that search result. Well, now they've taken and they actually publish a how-to right there, proving my point that it's extremely simple to make. But it was a brilliant step forward, and I mean, what I mean by brilliant, I'm really using the wrong word there. To me, that's actually a very big step forward for semantic search. And I say that just because there's a lot of subtleties in doing that right. Now, I mean, if we were to just brainstorm a little bit about what might be involved in that, is they're probably parsing a whole variety of sites to establish some sort of consistency in the instructions to help them gain enough confidence that it's a solid result. So this is a little bit analogous to a human process, right, of how you might learn as a human being. You know, you might ask someone that you consider an authority and they'd teach you how to make French toast, and that might be fine. If you're a kid, your mother might teach you. But in absence of that, if you were dealing with sources of not such a great deal of trust, as your mother hopefully was, you would poll several people and you would look for and try to find some commonality and draw a conclusion out of that. This is pretty sophisticated thinking going on.
Yes, absolutely. And again, it shows, I mean, one of the things which Amit Singhal talked about in SMX West, I think it was, he talked about the ability of search to become very nuanced in terms of its understanding of the context of the query. And he stressed that, you know, we're not there yet, but it's getting better all the time, and it's constantly scaling. And this is exactly what we're seeing. It's incredibly encouraging. I mean, we've only been, you know, halfway through the year 2014. And we're already seeing a lot more changes to what we had at the beginning of the year. So it's been a real roller coaster ride in terms of the excitement and where it's heading and how the changes have come about. And as we're going towards the end of the year, we're going to see even more of this. And that refinement which you mentioned is very much part of the entity building and the entity amplification that Google has in its index. The more entities it has, the greater validity it can sort of mine in the results. And then it can basically begin to look at the content of each website and make comparisons at a very fine-grained level, which it couldn't before. So all that is part of that scaling, and we should expect to see more and more of it. So in terms of changes, we really haven't seen anything just yet.
Well, and I think it's worth drawing that out even a little more, because when we first learned all of us about the machine concept of calling it an entity, you think of places, Eiffel Tower, you think of names, George Washington, you think of those kinds of things, right? And you go back to how to make French toast. Well, okay, now it's okay. I guess there is a thing called French toast, and there's a way to make it, right? But they did so much more than that. It was how to reset your iPhone, the kinds of new relationships that they introduced.
Yes.
Really very significant.
Yes, exactly. And I'm very glad you brought this up, because essentially the value of having entities which are high in trust is that then you can actually mine the value of the relationships with the things they interact with and draw new inferences from that. And what I mean by that, essentially, if you go back to, you gave the example of your mother, and if you think of a child, you look at your mother and you see how she interacts with people around her. And even though sometimes, or most of the times, the conversation to us is contextually agnostic because we haven't got the same context in order to understand it, we actually pick up whom to like and whom to dislike, whom to trust and whom not to trust, simply by the behavior and the connection of that relationship. And we haven't, we're not privy to the actual content of the conversation really, or even its context. So this is a good example to see how important it is. And I used the example when you said mother, because having a child and a mother, the relationship was one of high trust implicitly. So, and we're hardwired as children to look to our parents for guidance in that direction. So it's a good example.
There's an important takeaway to emphasize here for those of us in the search marketing world from what you guys have been talking about for the last few minutes with these the knowledge graph, the how-tos, the information boxes, as Google is showing more and more basic information right on the search page. It takes us back to remembering that Google's mission has never been to rank the websites of the world. Google's stated mission statement is to organize the world's information and make it more accessible, and that's what they're doing. So this underscores, I think, for us the value of not the value, but the importance of us creating truly unique, truly valuable content that that is worth bringing people to our site or our other outposts for, because more and more we're going to see this. This is going to be the way of it. That the simple, the low-hanging fruit, the simple information, the how-tos, the step-by-steps, the how to directions, and all these kinds of things, simple facts about the world. Google is going to be able to organize that and give it to people directly without them ever having to click. So you've got to be thinking that next step up now. You can't just be doing the basics in the information world anymore.
Yeah, I'll give it to you actually in a tagline, and that tagline is, don't build your business around displaying public domain information.
Right.
Yes.
There's no there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is the quality issue again, isn't it? If we have to go through a website, trolling through the pages, trying to understand the content in order to get a simple answer, this is not a good end-user experience. And that's exactly what it's about.
Yeah, no, it's true, and it's a very important thing for people to understand that you have to have more in your business than just pulling together and rendering large reams of publicly available information. That's not a long-term business. I mean,
Yes,
if you're doing
absolutely.
it and you're making some money on it now, just go into milking it for all it's worth and maximizing your profit mode, because it's got a short time horizon. Okay, so entity building. Is search creating a digital clone of you? Ooh, that's an interesting.
Okay, that is a really interesting question, and let's tackle this because actually there are several layers to that, and although it seems like a simple one, it isn't. Now, first of all, entity is a concept. So Google is building a concept of who we are and what we do, the same way that we understand ourselves, each person. And if you think how well we understand each other and also the imperfections within that setup, where we don't always understand who we actually see and who we actually talk to all the time, and there are a lot of subtleties to this. Well, Google has essentially the same problems. But there's a wider conversation within that, because Google very recently took out a patent for automated bots, which will be able to understand the sentiment of what we do and how we do it, and actually, they're social bots, I should say, and actually post on social networks on our behalf. And on the back of that, there's a whole lot of work which is going across the entire digital divide from every company that's out there, which mines sentiment and understands essentially the essence of how we interact, as well as the context of that interaction. And why is that all important? Because again, there's a new company which is out there, which is offering to make avatars of deceased people, those who have passed away. And what they said is that basically, if they mine all the kind of information from those people, all their social media posts, all their content, all their emails, they can create an avatar which would be passively lifelike and sufficiently so for us to actually interact with it in a way which we would if that person was alive. So there's a lot of developments happening across all this, which raise some pretty serious ethical questions we haven't addressed. And there's also a lot of excitement on the back of this because it is brand new territory. And I know this thing with deceased people and having an avatar sounds a little bit creepy, but from a very human point of view, it can also be a very comforting thing for some people to have. And I know from people whose relatives have passed away, they occasionally, people close to me, have told me that they occasionally sort of talk to them in their heads, in their minds, and they have a monologue, and that is a very human, comforting thing to do. So to actually have a digital version of that might be the next step.
Yeah, but I think we are a long way from being anywhere near the complexity of a human being, with where this is at. But I do think, sometime in our lifetimes, that computing power will be, smarter than humans are, and that raises all kinds of interesting questions, separate from the cloning. Do you do that or not?
Yes, we're getting towards singularity, and this is again, it's one of these things. But I mean, for that to happen, we have some way to go, I feel. But before that, we actually can have, before we get to full artificial intelligence, we can have possibly artificial intelligence, which is good enough for very specific contexts. And again, this is where that comes into its own. And I suspect this is where the social bots come into their own as well.
Yes, okay, so I have several weeks before the computers are smarter than we are, you're telling me?
Yes. Well, yes. Well, I hope it'll be a bit longer. Otherwise, we may have to work harder and sleep less.
Yes. I can't imagine you working harder or sleeping less, David Amerland. So,
well,
based on some of the times that I've been in communication with you, it was like in my evening, and you were in like Greece. I mean, goodness gracious.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I sleep very late sometimes and get up very early. But I try to also have some breaks in between.
There you go. Well, good. All right. So I'm going to pull up a question from Gene Layton here. Do how-tos with images of step-by-step instructions have a higher ranking than solely written?
Okay. First of all, great question. Secondly, natural enough, because the moment anything ranks, we ask ourselves, okay, is this the next thing to actually focus on, and should we do so? Here's what I'll say. First of all, they don't have any kind of preference compared to any other kind of data, but they do show up when the search query actually demands it. So, if you are trying to address something, and it could be done in a step-by-step way, and you haven't done that, then basically perhaps you should think about doing it. But within that context, I should also say, again, you shouldn't chase anything. Everything should happen naturally. So do look at the step-by-step format. Look at the content you're creating. If something fits naturally, do that. If you haven't done it already. But if it doesn't, trying to shoehorn things so you can show up in search or show up in, that's the wrong way to approach it. And certainly the websites which will come up in relation to that are websites with a high trust factor by Google. And that doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen on just one page of content or even perhaps 2 or 3 pages of content which are trying to game the new system. So do what you do to the best of your ability and try to gain authority by being the best website out there doing that.
So,
David,
go ahead, Mark.
I was saying I have a question. We talked a lot about Google trying to assess authority, and we know don't know entirely, but we know to a great extent how it does that with websites. That's been something that they've pretty much conquered, although they're continually trying to improve it. But when it comes to entities, in particular people and authorities, I'd be interested in your speculation about how you think they will determine that. Who are the trusted authorities in a given thing? Most people, you brought up social earlier. Most people assumed when this topic first came up that they're going to do that through social. Whoever gets the most social mentions, has the most important connections. But we're seeing more and more that they've been very shy about making use of social, partly because how little of it that they can really see, and some of the things that now that we can see more sophisticated way that it's not as necessarily a reliable indication as people might assume. So if not that, how is personal authority going to be assessed, do you think?
Okay, let's address the difficult part of this first. Social and how it stands, you're right, it's relatively easy to gain. Why? Because it is predicated upon social metrics, and most of those social metrics are easy to basically manufacture, whether you're talking about +1s or even reshares, and to some extent even engagement. So the way around for Google, because Google sees all of this, and essentially they see both clean signals like what they get in G+, which is a very transparent environment for them, and then relatively dirty signals, which what they get from Twitter and other social networks, and then zero signals, like what they get from Facebook, which is a big blank. So they take all of this together and they begin to factor it in terms of how the interaction, the engagement goes on websites. And one of the things which they're focusing on, I suspect, is in terms of sentiment mining. Not too long ago, they were talking about creating two different types of graphs. One is a comment graph, which goes to a profile. So they begin to understand the things which you talk about, and you talk about at length, as opposed to the things which you sort of socially talk about, which begin to factor into your authority. And then the second thing is how you actually talk about them, which is your sentiment graph. Now, sentiment mining has come some way since then, and it's been over a year since they put out the grants at universities, and we're beginning to see a refinement in that area. So essentially, the understanding of trust and authority for Google, algorithmically calculated, is very similar to how we would calculate it with a person we know. And how do we do that? Well, we know from our own relationships what a person is good at in terms of his knowledge, his authority, his character. We know more or less how he sounds, whether he's very positive about a few things and negative about other things. And that creates a kind of profile which we call in character. And the moment a person reacts in a different way, we say, well, this is out of character. And this comes to us very naturally based on our own data set. Google can do this algorithmically. So essentially we'll begin to see all this factored into the profiles of people and the activity they have across the web, which will impact on websites and the content they share, the content they interact with, and how they actually discuss it.
So I want to, well, first of all, since you mentioned social sites, I just want to give everybody a heads up that tomorrow at between 11:30 and noon Eastern Time, we will finally be publishing what was probably thought to be the mythical Twitter study that we've been working on for a long time. And David, you made reference to how, Google can't really see much of Facebook at all. They certainly can't see likes. It's totally invisible to them. But in terms of Twitter, we did a study of 963 different user profiles and looked at somewhat over 19,000 tweets. And 3.62% of those tweets were indexed by Google. Mm-hmm. Less than 4%.
Yep.
So that that should give you some idea as to how much they should they really think about using that signal. So clearly, social media isn't the only indicator, or even perhaps a significant indicator of what they might be looking at. So they are going to some other data sources for sure.
Yeah, I compare that to Eric, an analogy for folks, in why they say, well, so what if they only get so much? They could still use it, couldn't? Well, it'd be like if you were sent to review a rock concert, and you went to the concert, and for some reason you're sitting in a place where pretty much the only thing you could hear was the bass player. For some reason, just acoustically, you're only getting mostly the bass and very little of the other players. You really couldn't make a good evaluation of that band, of how well they were really playing and what was really going on in the whole experience. And that's a great reason why Google at this point can't put too much weight on the overall social signals, because if you're only hearing the bass player, you can't judge the band.
Right, and so now you're thinking about, okay, what are the other signals potentially, and certainly interaction and engagement at other levels with your content. Good signal, like they send a click to your page, what's the dwell time? It's hard to pick out what those signals might be, but there's a lot of choices that they have, and clearly they're going to do a lot of testing to figure out what works best for them.
Exactly, and I'm very glad you mentioned click, because essentially it comes down to the old way of signifying quality and engagement on a website which Singhal has talked about in the past, where he said, you get a long click and a short click, and there are indicators of the level of interaction, engagement, and the quality of the content. And although it sounds, well, so you're doing clicks, right? Well, yes, but if you're doing this in a massive load of data, then you begin to actually see the patterns developing within it, and then from that you can begin to draw inferences which impact on quality and authority and trust, and actually begin to have significant value.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So then, I want to introduce a new element into the conversation now. I actually published an article a short while ago in Search Engine Land, in which I explored the concept of cooccurrence analysis. It was inspired by a presentation that Marcus Tober of Search Metrics did at SMX Advanced. And basically what they did is they looked at the top 30 results across 25,000 different search queries. And they did an analysis of phrases that appeared on pages and found what the most common occurring pages were, and observed whether or not those terms on those pages were occurring more on things that rank in first, second, third, fourth, and so forth position. And they found that there actually was a very strong correlation between the use of major important terms, and I'm going to define what that is in a minute, the usage level in those top positions and the things in the lower positions. And let me explain this a little bit with an example, because right now I'm sure it seems a little obtuse. But imagine you have a shoe site. You're selling women's running shoes. Okay. Now you could design a page where it says women's running shoes in the title, and then it has an H1 tag that says women's running shoes, and then women's running shoes is repeated a whole bunch of other times on the page. And now contrast that page with something that has women's running shoes in the title, and then on the page you find other words like shipping, price, size, color, different brands, things that start to sound like a page that more completely answers the question, what do I want when I type the query women's running shoes? What I probably want when I type that in is shoes for my wife, just to answer the question. But putting that aside for the moment, the point of this is, and I gave a very simple example, but Google knows the other things that that you are looking for, most likely when you answer a query. If you type in or enter a query, when you enter a query like Eiffel Tower, for example, you could tell by looking at Google Suggest that people are looking for history, facts, restaurant, tickets. So they're like the top 4 things they're looking at. And then you go look at the top 10 web pages that get returned for Eiffel Tower, and they all address at least one of those topics, if not more than one. The reason why I'm going through all of this is, to me, this is an example of an expanded sense of semantic search, right? Because you're really getting into, all right, have I created a page that when someone comes to me on a given search query, that the chances of them satisfied with the experience are high. And that's not satisfied by a keyword stuffing page or the SEO that people might have done even 4 or 5 years ago. It's designed by a more holistic viewpoint of how do I create a complete experience for the people who come to your page.
Exactly, and I think again, this is something which was discussed by Amit Singhal at some length at SMX West, and he said essentially that with semantic search they're doing 2 things. They're looking at the relationships between pages and objects and things and people and entities, and they're mining that. But that's not enough. Once you have the relationship and once you get a value from that, then they have to go at greater depth on each page and actually extract the value and the quality of the content there, or rather extract the value, the quantity, and establish the value. And that's where the magic really happens, because you can have pages which do similar things perhaps, but they don't do it in a similar way, and the quality is different. And that's the one element which differentiates things, and we are very good at sort of spotting as people, but traditionally search hasn't been able to do. And now it's actually becoming very capable at doing that, which brings us back down to what Google has been saying since the word go, which is create quality, don't chase search. And we've been saying it with semantic search constantly. Address a search query. Don't worry about keywords. Frequently, this has been misconstrued as saying that keywords don't matter. Certainly, they do. And your example here specifies not only do they matter, but also the semantically generated keywords which are associated with a particular search topic are also important. But these things will occur naturally in a quality page, and that's how it should happen. You should really focus on that quality for that human visitor coming to the page. And if you don't focus on that, then you should expect to not rank very well.
Yep. Oh, Eric's muted there.
Yep.
Eric, you're on mute. Oh, looks like he's having trouble.
What I was saying was brilliant. And you were,
you're just testing our lip reading skills. We're beginners.
Yeah, I muted because I was typing a response to someone. I didn't want you to hear my keystrokes and take over the screen. So, bad management. There we go. Bad Eric.
It's okay.
But to me, it's like part of what the co-occurrence thing showed to me is that they're taking relationships beyond just like, okay, Eiffel Tower is a thing that has a height and has a builder and there's pictures of it and there's restaurants and things like that. But they're really beginning to take that to the next stage where they're mapping probable user intents. And that's a different kind of relationship that they're drawing now.
Yeah.
That's another level of sophistication.
Yeah. They're also... I was going to say they're also constantly refining our understanding of us, what we're looking for, how we look for it, and if we accept, if we take 100 people in a room and we see how they interact and what they say, within an hour or so, a human observer would pretty much be able to second guess some of the conversations, and that happens at a very basic level with very imperfect attention and retention span of the human brain. Now imagine having an omnipotent almost computer which remembers everything, sees everything, and pretty much can predict where things are going. I think that's the real powerful thing, which is now also linked to Google Now and predictive search and the way things will evolve in the very near future.
Yeah, there's that thing. There was a thing of the demonstration that Matt Cutts did that was rather amazing at SMX Advanced, where it was a rather bold thing to do because he did it live on stage holding his Android phone up to the microphone. But we've all heard about this. We've all seen small examples of how you can ask a question in voice search on Google, and then just keep asking questions without using the original thing. Like he used the example that he said, where is the Space Needle? Because we were in Seattle, and then he was captain like, how tall is it? When was it built? And using pronouns. And it continued to give facts about the tower. But then when he kept going deeper, and it got to an interesting level that I hadn't seen before, where he said, so what are the best restaurants nearby? And brings up a list of restaurants, still restaurants near the Eiffel Tower, and then it got to the place or near the Space Needle, and then saying like, help me get to the third one that's on the list, and up pops Google Maps with directions to the third restaurant on the list. Where I'm, that's amazing enough, but where I'm going with it in relation to what you and Eric were just talking about is as Google moves toward being not just an information provider, but more and more our personal assistant, which is where Google Now is really headed, will we start to see when you do a search for something like the Space Needle, if Google's been seeing that a significant number of people end up asking, where are the restaurants around that, will they just start to show restaurant results alongside of searches for just Space Needle, or even searching Space Needle tickets, but you also get recommendations of restaurants? Do you see that kind of?
Yeah, well, definitely, because the value of anything is context. And if we think about the people we really know, and the people who are just acquaintances, and if we think about the people we know, we actually know what almost not quite. We can't predict what they will say at any one time, but we can understand the intent when they say something. We can understand the context when they say something. We can understand what's implied. Whereas somebody who's just an acquaintance, we're very careful with, and we phrase things differently simply because we're probing to establish a kind of context. So in answer to your question, yes, this is exactly where Google now and semantic search is definitely heading, in that it'll be able to predict the context of what we do by analyzing and remembering how we interact and comparing that profile against the hundreds of millions of profiles of other users who do something similar perhaps, and actually giving us value. And when it gets that right, the value for us will be phenomenal, because it'll be almost like having an invisible assistant, tireless and infallible most of the time, to actually do things for us without us even having to ask. And I think that's absolutely brilliant. That's exactly where the value of this connectivity and data comes into its own.
Yeah, I mean, I give a different version of the demo that Matt did, and I tailored it a specific way, because, I mean, at some level, all this, Hummingbird as a platform was tied into enabling a lot more to happen with semantic search, and I've seen people write articles about how that killed the long tail search, because we would take complicated search queries, natural language queries, and distill them down to very simple ones. And I do the demo in reverse fashion, because I've done it with the Empire State Building, and rather than saying give me some pictures, I'll just say the word pictures, and I'm actually demonstrating that they take short tail queries and they convert them into long tail queries, right? Or I say the word restaurants. I don't say give me restaurants near the Empire State Building. I'll just say restaurants. I don't say here are restaurants near the Empire State Building. So again, it's an example of how it's taken a short tail query and through context understood that it's made it made it into a longer tail query. And this is the thing you keep emphasizing, David, which I think is more important than whether it's long tail or short tail. It's understanding the context that matters, right? And sometimes from a language perspective, that might go in either direction. The real issue is, are you addressing the context of the person who's arrived at your page?
Yeah, exactly. And if you think about the example you just gave, I mean, if you say, for instance, restaurants, and that essentially is almost like a personal code, because this is how you relate to search. So, instead of using a long drawn-out sentence, you use very short words. But that, in turn, when it's actually put into search, is measured in your profile. It's understood in terms of the context of what you're trying to do. The intent is inferred, so it's decoded into something longer, and then that is matched against the results, and then that is also assessed against other profiles for accuracy. So it is magic, because it happens in microseconds. And if we think of the computing power that's necessary to do that, it's actually quite staggering.
Yeah, it is. And to me, it's also, there's different communication styles, right? So if you have an overly busy type A person who sometimes is very crisp in their communications, I'm not talking about anybody on this panel right now. Sometimes you're going to use one-word phrases, and that's just because it shouldn't be necessary to say more, right? So,
absolutely.
And then other people are going to be very expressive.
Yes, exactly. And I mean, this is absolutely magic. And we have to remember that Google is constantly learning all the time. I know we use Google ourselves to learn, but it's constantly learning from us. It's learning nuance, it's learning expressions and language and culture and different profiles, and it's constantly adding to that knowledge. It's evolving with every search we carry out. And that's why we're seeing a constant scaling of what it's actually able to do.
I just want to pop in this comment from Blaine Hurtado here. They just put up, but it's germane to what we're saying. He says, I feel someone's ability to determine the appropriate keyword phrase for their search is key. Do you think this voice recognition, it just popped off my screen. Yeah. You think this voice recognition will help less search detailed savvy users narrow down their results in the future? And that's exactly what we're saying. It does. That's the intent behind it, right? That it's that people don't. Before, we used to joke in the early days of Google that you had to be a savvy searcher. You had to kind of learn to train yourself to type in just the right words that would finally get Google to show you what you wanted to see. Well, with Hummingbird and semantic search, the aim is that the machine becomes less visible. You don't have to think about the machine. You just talk to it the way that you would to your friends, and get the right answers, right?
Absolutely, and that's the same development curve with anything. If we think of the motor car, you actually had to know something about mechanics and engineering to keep your car on the road, even if you're going from A to B, because the chances of it breaking down perhaps were fairly high in the beginning. So it was not for the average user. Computers, you had to actually know how to get under the bonnet of your operating system and delete some files and add some files and do something else and move files about and rename them, simply to keep the system humming. And now, all this happens in the background. You switch a computer on. You really don't need to mess with its file system or its file naming directories or anything like this. You just get on and do what you want. And technology, as it becomes more complicated, it actually becomes invisible in many ways. It's that invisibility factor which you mentioned. And search is definitely heading in that direction.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think the context is such a big deal. Another way to, another data point on this, which I really haven't explored that much, but I'm really looking forward to exploring, is that not too long ago, Dwayne Forrester published a post about the queries that people do while driving Teslas, because Bing is the search engine in use. That's a very specific context. Hopefully
yes.
It's the person on the passenger side that's doing it, by the way, not the driver. But that's a very specific context, and you have to imagine that query set is going to be significantly different.
Yes, and Dwayne Forrester, for those who are not aware, is the product manager for Bing. So, and he's, I've heard him speak a number of times, and I sort of discussed things with him. He's an incredible guy.
Absolutely. You popped up a question there a second ago?
Yes. Okay, this is from Kim Boltman, and she says, how do incognito searches figure in, and Google prompts Control+N every once in a while? I've wondered about that. Not that I make questionable searches.
About your questionable searches, Kim, let's discuss those at length. Sorry.
We don't infer anything, right? It's a non-judgmental show. However, yeah, okay. Now, I know that when we are not signed in, Google still picks up very specific signals because there are some persistent cookies. When we go into incognito mode, there's still some persistent cookies there which are anonymized in terms of user behavior. But what the incognito mode does primarily is it basically doesn't put the search you carried out in the search history, and it doesn't allow any more personal data to sort of flow through, so they might pop up in the work computer. So in terms of Google, they're learning all the time from that even. They're learning less perhaps because obviously they're curtailing the amount of signals that they actually draw from that, but there's never anything which you do on the web which can happen in entire silos so nobody sees it.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating, by the way, that the new incognito window icon is a guy with dark sunglasses and looks like a spy. You know, this is Google's messaging to us, right?
Yes, well, yeah.
But anyway, they're giving you an opinion of what you're like when you're doing this. So I'm going to pop in a question here from Nazim Beltran, asking, where does that leave Siri?
Whoa. Okay. Let's talk about this, because essentially a lot of times the question has popped up whether Google actually has any real competitors in semantic search. And the moment this happens, you know, you think, okay, it's technology, it's programming, it requires engineers, how difficult is it to get? And it's yes and no. Yes, it is, but at the same time, everything we've been discussing here is data. And really, in order to have a semantic search or any kind of intelligent search which responds to you in a way that gives value, you need to have data to train it on and then data to constantly refine it. And Google is the acknowledged leader by a great margin in this field. And a classic example of this, I think, is if we compare Google and Bing. And now, if we go in the US environment, Google and Bing are, because the semantic technology behind each one is fairly similar, Google and Bing are fairly close to each other. And certainly, Bing sometimes, in very specific data sets, brings up results which can be slightly better than Google's. Going to the global setting, and Bing is very, very far behind in terms of quality. And the reason for this is because they don't have the legal agreements in place internationally that Google has, which allow them to access and use the data of the users who carry out search. As a result of that, their search quality outside the US is deplorable, I must say that. I've done searches in places which range from Shanghai to Warsaw in Poland a few weeks back, and these are just test searches, and Bing really suffers there, and this is what's primarily holding it back. Now, the thing is with this is that time is against you. As time goes on, Google acquires more and more and more data, so at some point critical mass is reached to the effect that it is very difficult to actually get up and catch it.
Right, and they're able to subliminally whisper to you, never use Bing while you're...
That's right. Well, I think, they've got on Chromebooks, they have, these sort of electrodes that the moment you think of putting any kind of search there, you get a jolt.
Yeah, you've typed in B-I-N, and then this is...
Yes.
Which is really hurt the bingo sites here in America. They're just really suffering.
It's Pavlovian technique, right? But you're right.
Yes, indeed. They disable the keyword as you reach toward the period key if you typed in Bing. And you can type that O, but you can't type a period. So, and predictably, we are already at 1:58 here, guys.
One quick question.
Okay.
Whoa, okay, Brian Kenyon, he says, what prevents people from marking up content for better ranking when it shouldn't really be marked up? And of course, by marking up, he means semantic search markup or semantic markup.
Or schema, yeah.
Yep. Okay, so let's establish this for a second. First of all, Google, on a number of occasions, through its public speakers, Matt Cutts, and it's primarily Matt Cutts, has said that implementing semantic markup is not a ranking signal. So you can do it until the cows come home. It doesn't mean that your site automatically will rank better in search than anybody else's. Having said that, semantic markup does help better understanding of your website and its content. But the moment it does that, then your website and its content have to measure up in terms of quality. So if you have a website which is perhaps not as good as it should be, and you implement semantic markup thinking, well, nobody else does it in my field, it's going to give me an instant win, well, the answer is no, it won't. Because if it doesn't match or measure up in terms of quality, then definitely it's not going to do anything for you. And certainly one of the reasons that Google is, although they set up the schema.org along with Yahoo and Microsoft, stroke Bing, in terms of semantic markup, one of the reasons they're not 100% behind it is because they're hoping to do it alone, simply because errors creep in. Sometimes the errors are simply human errors and they accumulate, so you can't trust it entirely. And the second thing, of course, is that anything that we do as people is always subject to a little bit of gaming, because unfortunately this is a psychological makeup, and this also can accumulate. So in answer to your query, if you try and game the system, you'll be find out with semantic markup actually a lot faster than if you weren't doing it, and you'll be in trouble.
And we saw Google actually doing that, filtering that in December of 2013. We often talk about they reduced the authorship snippets, but it was really all rich snippets that were generated by markup, such as review stars, things like that. That sites that were misusing those things, putting Google authorship on pages that weren't real authored content, putting review star markup on things that weren't legitimate reviews, etc. were losing those snippets in search. So even though they weren't a ranking factor, they were no longer getting that whatever advantage they thought they were getting by showing that. So just show that Google is going after that. They do look for the just as they do with link spam. They can see the patterns of people who abuse those things. So it's just another area where gaming is not going to really get you any win in the long run.
Yeah, and I think the key to remember here is that there's two components to ranking any piece of content. One is basically relevance, what's it about, and the other is importance, and that's of the things that are relevant to the same topic, what's the most important. And semantic search plays a little bit in both those spaces now. It's because the importance can be partly determined by how complete something may be, but if you try to fool the system by putting markup there to say that you're relevant to something and make it look semantically rich, but the audience is not engaging in it, you're going to fail the rest of the importance side of the measurement and create a disconnect, which is going to be a signal to Google that you are trying to game the system, and you'll get caught out. That's basically how that will work.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, we've done it, boys. 2:02. We're already at the end of the hour, and as usual, it's like, okay, ready for the next hour? Let's go.
Yeah, absolutely. It goes by so quickly every time. It just flies by. So it's amazing.
It's sort of geeking out. We love doing that stuff. What can you do? So, any closing thoughts for today, David?
Yes, definitely. Things that matter in semantic search. Well, it's what you do and how you do it. And that's in the full measure of the word now. This is not a trick. This is not a gimmick. Think about what you do. Think how you do it. And think that these things should add up to a unique selling proposition. You should be doing it differently and better than anybody else. You should be doing it uniquely yourself. And if you can't answer those two questions adequately, then all the little tricks which come up in search and SEO and all, they will only be short-term and they won't really help you in the long run.
Mark, thoughts?
Yeah, the DME show this Thursday. Want to promote that. 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Rand Fishkin will be the guest of both Eric and I. We'll be doing a rare double co-hosting appearance on the Digital Marketing Excellence Show. Rand Fishkin of Moz, of course, formerly SEO Moz, one of the best-known people in our business, one of the nicest and most vivacious people in our business. Always an interesting conversation with him, so you won't want to miss that.
Yeah, no, I'm really looking forward to that one. We're going to be talking about what separates success and failure in content marketing campaigns, and so that should be a great discussion. Just to wrap up today's show, I think what I want to leave people with is, if you start thinking about how you're going to prosper in this world, we've talked about some of the concepts, but really step back and understand what people that are your prospective customers would want to find on a page like yours, and invest in this. Go do surveys, or use usertesting.com, or use different things to really learn about the kinds of things. Study, do Cooccurrence analysis on the other search results that are ranking for what you want to work for. See what things they are putting on their pages, because there's probably a reason why they're there. Try to offer a complete experience, and learning how to do that should display my worst possible English. That's where the money's at.
Yes.
All right, thanks everybody. That's it for the Digital Marketing Answers show for today. Thanks for watching. As Mark says, join us on Thursday with Rand. What a week for us. David today, Rand on Thursday. That's our dynamic duo, albeit somewhat separated for the week. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye, everyone.